Hey, Suzanne, thanks so much. And good to see a bunch of people on the webinar. Super excited to give this talk, and thanks for Zoometica for sponsoring the talk. It's kind of actually interesting because one of the companies we're going to talk about is Zoometica, and I gave this presentation all kinds of times before you guys have asked me to give it. So kind of interesting. So anyways, let's jump into it. Thanks for the introduction, Suzanne. I'm going to just go ahead and start my screen sharing. And here we go. So I like when I give these presentations remotely over Zoom, especially to make them as interactive as possible. So as I'm going through this presentation, it's going to not be your typical CE presentation that most of you have gone through. It's got quite a bit of a different format, and feel free to come off mute and ask me questions if you have them as we're going through it, or throw them in the chat. We'll make this as interactive as possible. And my hope is at the end of the presentation today, which won't take the entire hour, you guys have a few companies that you can go check out and find some interesting tools that might help you solve some of the issues or challenges that you have in your day-to-day vet practice today. So let's jump in. So as Suzanne had mentioned, the reason that I'm in this beautiful vantage point to give this presentation is 4 years ago, which is really hard to believe, I started a podcast called the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. I did that as a way to stay inside veterinary medicine because I sold my first vet specific software company. And I love the industry and I wanted to be involved and I wanted to give back. And 4 years ago, we're talking pre-pandemic now, it was kind of popular opinion that there wasn't much innovation happening inside veterinary medicine. And I didn't believe that to be true. I just believed that there wasn't maybe enough people talking about the innovation that was happening. So we started this podcast. We're 200 episodes later. If you like innovation and you want to understand more about what's happening in the veterinary world, subscribe to our podcast. It's everywhere that you can find a podcast, the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. It's me, I'm not a veterinarian, and a friend of mine, Dr. Ivan Zach, who also co-founded and sold a vet company called SmartFlow. They were bought by IDEX. And so we have 20-minute conversations, super tiny, quick conversations with innovators from all over the globe. And that's how I've come up with the list of companies that I'm going to share with all of you today. So I've started a bunch of companies, 6 so far, 20 years doing this. I love pet health. I love veterinarians. I love this industry. And that's why I still do the podcast up until this day, because I really feel like we're able to help people find things that can help them with a lot of the challenges that veterinary medicine has today. I also run a company called Talkatoo. We create tools that positively impact the profession to help people get through their documentation faster. So that's a little bit about me. And it says that I hate keyboards. My company is a voice recognition company and a scribe company. So I'm trying to help people get free from the keyboard. So the format. So we're on to our first company. The format is I'm going to talk about the company, the problem that they solve, the episode of the podcast, so you guys can take a double click and find out more about each individual company, because there's an episode for every single one of the companies on the podcast, which is a 20-minute conversation, not a 5 or 2 minute slide. So VetStoria, let's use the hands up feature because it's kind of cool. How many people have heard of VetStoria? If you're listening and you can put your hand up, do it, because then I'll know if you've heard of them before, right inside Zoom. Which would be kind of cool for me to know. So VetStoria is founded by 2 Julians. So I say it's founded by Julian Square, 2 veterinarians out of France that started this company. And really what they kind of saw, the appointment problem was, the issue that they saw is just scheduling appointments via the phone is a hassle. Getting a hold of people on the phone, answering the phone, clients' preferences when it comes to the phone, especially as we have all of these millennials enter the pet ownership world. The way that people want to interact with people is not the same as it always used to be. So they saw this problem and they created a solution, and they're years into doing this now, but they've created a solution that allows people to schedule appointments online or through widgets that are on their website. They've also added telemedicine to their offering to further support the digitization of the veterinary practice. So their solution provides real-time booking online, secure payments. They do some digital marketing. They help with analytics, and that's one of the probably the most interesting things that they do. If you're sitting, running a vet practice and you don't really understand what's happening in your practice, they've actually made a lot of tools based upon people visiting your website, booking online appointments, doing telemedicine, that you can start to see and analyze trends over time. So really interesting company. And these guys are probably the largest out of all of the companies on my list. But the reason I like them the most is their interfaces. So the software that you look at, the experience that you would bring to your customer by adopting their tool, they're some of the best in the business. It really looks and works super duper well. So if you're looking for the episode, Dr. Julien Renaud is a French guy, and I always give him a hard time with his accent because he talks really fast when he gets excited, but he was on the podcast. The episode is online scheduling. If you're interested about this, if you're not doing it now, or if you're doing it now and you maybe want something different to look at, I would absolutely recommend listening to his podcast. One of the things that we do on our podcast with everybody that we have on, we ask them for a book recommendation. And these book recommendations are going to be far away from VetMed, because not all the people that come on our podcast are software people, but there's a lot of interesting books that get recommended through the podcast. And I always recommend, listening to the episode. And if you think you really like what the person was saying, then definitely check out the books that they're recommending, because there's a lot of really interesting books that are so far away from VetMed, but still have a purpose. So his big challenge when he started the company was selling the product. And so he's recommended a sales book and how to do inbound selling to get a company to $100 million. It's a book that I read, very, very fascinating, and a really neat author. So that's VetStoria and the book that he recommended in the episode. We can also make all these slides available afterwards. So if you want to get to the episode very easy, you'll be able to do that. So PetDesk, another kind of interesting company in the space. And the most interesting thing about these two companies, last year they were acquired by the same company. So now they're working together to kind of like innovate collectively. So this collective has bought a few vet tech startup companies, PetDesk, Contact, VetStoria, and I think Whisker Cloud were all purchased by the same company. And I think it's really interesting to see some consolidation in the vet space that's not driven by IDEXX or Covetrus. So there's more big players emerging, and they're emerging by buying a bunch of these smaller companies that were really doing transformational stuff. So PetDesk, and you'll notice that there is some crossover or overlap with some of the companies. None of these companies have paid me to put them on the list. I just think the founders and the companies themselves are really interesting, and the problems that they're solving are also cool as well. So designed specifically for the veterinary practice, it's a communication management platform that bridges the gap between veterinarians and their clients. So what PetDesk saw is this issue inside the veterinary industry of just not having enough time in the day. And so that what they did is they said, hey, listen, I bet if we apply some technology, we can increase communication between the pet parent and the veterinary clinic. We can help optimize this stuff, and we can fix some other things along the way. So they do online appointment scheduling and confirmations to customers. They allow pet parents to track their pet health and communicate with vet staff kind of outside those once a year, twice a year appointments. They can submit appointment requests, access their records, make appointments, and more. They allow the prescriptions for the pet to be viewed in a simple app with all of that information. And then they really extend this ability to communicate with those clients by sending targeted messages, whether they're text messages or other kind of messages, to individual customers or groups of customers. So maybe you have a bunch of customers that recently got a puppy in the pandemic, maybe. You could call them new puppy parents. And you can send targeted messages to those groups. And really, really slick. These guys have been around for quite a while. The episode that we had with these guys, with Taylor, the founder, on the podcast was effective client communication in the veterinary practice. And these guys have learned the hard way. They've, made the mistakes. They've got the war wounds. I think the company's been around for about 8 years, and really, really interesting. It's also interesting to me to realize, and just now, that both Julian and Taylor had both recommended sales books. And interesting that they were both acquired last year. So they both know how to sell their products to veterinarians and to veterinary practices, and they both have created really interesting products that are now combined under the same roof. So very interesting, cool software. And you can see this kind of trend of like online appointments being one of the ways that technology enthusiasts and innovators are identifying a problem inside veterinary practice to kind of optimize. And so they're thinking, if we can get the phone to ring less and people to schedule their own appointments, we can have those CSRs or those front desk managers do more meaningful work and maybe take some pressure off the practice. So next, Digitale. So a cloud-based all-in-one practice management system for the veterinary practice of today with an integrated pet parent app. So another practice management system. So I think at last count, there's 81. Most of us in practice are on Avamark or Cornerstone. They still dominate, but there's a lot of new and interesting software that's being built to help manage the day-to-day running of a vet hospital and where all of these records go. So the problem that they've aimed to solve is out-of-date and clunky legacy systems, lack of time, staff burnout, hard to integrate add-ons, complicated workflows, costs, and just really old systems that have not been modernized. One of the big things that these guys do, and a lot of the other new practice management systems, are cloud-based. So there's no more server in the closet. And I think that that's a trend that we're going to just continue to see happen over the years. Lack of KPIs and tracking, no easy way to understand the dashboards of what's happening in your hospital. So these guys have definitely bit off a lot. Not only are they a practice management system, but they've got an integrated pet parent app that runs in the pocket of your customers that ties directly into the practice management system. And so they do a lot of the same things that PetDesk and VetStoria do, but they have it in a more integrated way. So if you're a small practice looking at buying a bunch of different tools, this might be a very interesting thing to look at, because not only are they practice management, they're also doing online appointments, chat support, video, and telemedicine, and reporting. So they're really trying to say, hey, how many of these things that are core to the practice can we put together to help improve the way that the practice runs? And interesting story, they started in Europe, had a big base of business and really wanted to attack the US market. And they're one of the only privately held practice management companies that is not part of a larger group. There's been a lot of acquisition. EasyVet was bought out of Auckland by IDEX last year. Covetrus also bought, oh my God, it's called Pulse now. It's called eVet Practice. So a lot of these practice management systems have been folded into larger portfolios. Digitale is one of the ones that hasn't, and they're definitely innovative. They've got some really interesting investors. Google's on their investor team, and many, many other kind of high-profile American investors are on their team. So I think they're definitely a company to kind of look out for. And if you're thinking about changing practice management systems, definitely one to consider, one to look at. The episode was called Client Communication and Retention. Sebastian's a friend of mine. He's the CEO. And he recommends reading Predictably Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions, which is a really cool book, and I would highly recommend it. The problem with doing this podcast for me is that we've had 200 people on the podcast, which means I have probably bought 50 or 60 books that remain on my shelf yet to be read. This is not one of them. I've actually read this book, so, but too many recommendations. Next one, and like I said, you'll see a trend emerge. So Instinct, very, very interesting company that's doing all kinds of things again. So they're in a cloud-based operating system for the modern veterinary hospital. They call their practice management an EHR, but they're doing the same, very similar things as Digitale is doing. So they have a standalone workflow treatment plan. So like for optimizing the workflow in the hospital, they have e-prescribing, and then they also have the practice management system. So lots of really interesting takes on solving the problem. They're connecting 3 or 4 pieces together, like Digitale was as well, but different pieces. So these guys, the reason that I like Instinct Science so much is that this workflow optimization in the clinic, I think, is something that is worth a look for every practice out there. I mean, unless you're just such a well-oiled machine that everybody starts and ends their day on time, and you've got the hospital running, you know, like a Swiss watch. Probably something to look at, this kind of idea of workflow. So this episode was really interesting. And the reason it was really interesting is because they're a direct competitor to my co-host's former company. They built this digital workflow treatment plan in their business. And so the episode, if you listen to it, you'll see a little bit of awkward nature in the episode because my co-host, although he sold his company, it was the first time speaking with somebody that built the same thing. So interesting. So their solution is these treatment plans, the workflow system, the EMR or EHR, or the PIMS, which is just a medical records practice management system, and then the e-prescribing. So very, very interesting, doing all kinds of neat stuff, have secured a ton of investment, and are growing fairly quickly. So if you're at a trade show, maybe stop by and say hello to them. Get them to show you what they're doing. And if you're thinking of a new practice management system, once again, I'd recommend both of these. His book recommendation was A Revolutionary Approach to Inbound Sales, Content Marketing, and Today's Digital Consumers. Next one. So once again, like all of these first few, with the exception of Instinct, I think have some of the same attributes. So PetSnap, founded by a guy named Dr. Tom Jenkins. He's a friend of mine. He lives in the UK. And they built this app for communication, you know, the unsustainable number of inbound calls, missed calls, poor customer service, compromised patient care. And they're solving a bunch of different things. The ability to chat with the veterinary practice asynchronously, so not right away, but queuing up those conversations, booking appointments, reminders, digital payments, and even video calls to do telemedicine. So a really interesting solution. And the thing that I love the most about PetSnap is their app that runs on the phone for the pet parent is a joy to use. It's so simple. And I think that creating simple to use software is very, very, very hard. And so anybody that gets that right, like gets an automatic thumbs up for me, because I know how hard it is being the founder of a technology and software company. Their interfaces are beautiful and they're doing some really cool stuff. So, you know, a lot of these companies try to adapt in the pandemic to provide video calls, telemedicine, teletriage. And it's interesting because although we did change as a profession during the pandemic, a lot of those changes have been rolled back. And so it's interesting to see a lot of these companies still really doubling down on some of these features. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that, you know, a lot of these features, whether it's teletriage or telemedicine, can really help take some of the burden off the hospital and potentially help optimize the hospital experience. So a very worthwhile episode. Tom is an incredible guy with incredible stories. He was a veterinarian for a Buddhist monastery that had a bunch of tigers in Thailand as one of his first jobs. So the episode's amazing. This guy's incredible. They built an incredible company. And his book recommendation was Napoleon's Master by David Lawdave. So interesting book, something totally out of left field. If you're looking for something to read, maybe you're lucky and going on holidays. Pick up one of these books. You probably won't be let down, because the coolest thing about running this podcast is I get to meet really, really smart and amazing people from all around the world every single week. And they always have something to recommend to read or to watch, which is kind of cool. And you guys get to share in a bit of that now as well. All right, so SignalPet, very, very interesting company, and definitely a hot topic inside some circles in veterinary medicine, this idea of AI and using AI to do things like image recognition and radiograph recognition. So what do they do and what problem were they trying to solve? So SignalPet, really interesting. One of the co-founders of Blue Pearl, and then Mr. Kaur, or Lore, they started this company, and they wanted to use AI to help improve the ability to answer this need of using radiology and radiographs to provide better medical outcomes. And so the fascinating thing about this company is 9 years ago, I was in California at a conference at Google, and the chief medical officer for the country of Japan, Italy, and Brazil were all at this forum, and they were on a stage and they were talking about how in human medicine, every radiograph in those countries is read by AI. We're talking like 8 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago now. And at that time, I thought that that was really, really fascinating that they were using image recognition to diagnose what was happening in radiographs. And I went to that session, was pretty amazed by it, and then forgot about it. And then literally, I think 2 years ago, SignalPet showed up, and they were doing the same thing, but in VetNet. And I don't know that everybody on the call knows this, but in the world of veterinary medicine, there's like just over 300 veterinary radiologists. So not enough to read all the radiographs. And so because of that, like severe limitation of people, radiographs are not used as much as they could be for a diagnostic tool. There's lack of confidence in radiographic readings that causes tunnel vision, lack of team and time efficiency, text messages for second opinions. If any of you can relate to this, I'm sure all of you can, you might want to look at SignalPet. The solution SignalPet provides is literally a second set of eyes on all radiographs. And think about that, for a second. So it's 3:30 in the morning, you get called in for an emergency, you're at the clinic by yourself, you don't want to wake up your colleagues, or maybe you don't have colleagues. You think you should take a radiographic image, you do that, and you're confused, you don't know what to do. If you had SignalPet, you can pass it through their AI. It will give you an idea. It's maybe not going to be exactly correct every single time, but the idea is it's a second opinion. And if you need even more, you're able to actually refer any of those cases to a radiologist and get almost an instant return back. So you've got the AI, then you've got it paired with humans. And I think that that's a really interesting model, and probably the one that we're going to see win in veterinary medicine, which is AI plus humans is better than humans by themselves in a lot of cases. And so I think that you're going to see more and more companies do things like this. And it's also worth an honorable mention. There's a new company doing this. It's called Ratimol. Smaller company, a little bit scrappier, different user interface experiences, but definitely worth a look. If this is interesting to you, I would actually look at both Ratimol and SignalPet. So the episode is Improving Radiology. Laura recommends Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, which is an amazing book. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. It's a challenging, thought-provoking book that kind of brings us from our origins to modern day, and it's definitely worth a look. All right, so our sponsor of today's talk. So what are they doing that I think is really neat? So they're focusing on advancing the health, effectiveness, and financial well-being of veterinarians. Zumedica is an all-in-one diagnostic solution that looks across the spectrum of veterinary care and identifies unique opportunities to provide those solutions. So but there's one particular product that really kind of caught my eye that we talked about on the episode of the podcast, and the reason that I put them on the slides was their TRUVIEW product. So the idea of getting accurate images of cytology and hematology slides is complicated. Working with an external pathologist has typically been slow, and so they've created this incredible device, which is like an all-in-one. It's like the iMac of a microscope. So it's like the Apple met the microscope, and there was a bunch of other problems, and they've solved them all in one. So the solution allows for basically a fully automated process from preparing those cytology and hematology slides. It's paired with telepathology. It's like this large-ish machine, you know, this by this, that sits on the desk, and you can prepare the slides, you can send them in, and then you can take those samples, you can view them yourself on the device, or you can send them to a telepathologist, and you can receive the results within minutes instead of days. And so this device and innovation, particularly in veterinary medicine, I think provides a lot of value. It provides the ability to kind of do something that was a slow process and speed it way up, which is exactly where I think the innovation is, in my opinion. They've taken something from days to, you know, an hour tops, which I think is fascinating. And we had their CEO on the podcast, and this guy is something else. Larry has experience that stems from NASA to other health tech companies, and he's just an all-around interesting guy. And he was the first person out of over 200 people to not give us a book recommendation. You know, the question is, what inspired you lately or in your career that you'd like to share with our audience? And his answer was he's not a rule follower, obviously, because every other person out of 200 has given us the answer that we look for, which is a book or a TED Talk or YouTube. But he said when he entered animal health, the industry was just a short time ago, I think like under 2 years for sure. He was inspired by all of the veterinary practices and the people, and that motivated him to help even more. And Zoometica has been growing and acquiring innovative companies at quite the pace. So pretty interesting company, and it was really interesting to get to know Larry and to have him on our podcast. Next one. Oh, and we're going at quite a clip here. So VetSnap, interesting guy. So Mr. Xu, or Shi Yang, once again, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine. We actually spent an afternoon together in Los Angeles, I think maybe 2 years ago. He was telling me about this new company that he was starting, and his former role was this chief technical officer for NVA, so National Veterinary Associates. He was the guy controlling all the technology at the top for over 1,000 hospital organization. So from his vantage point, he saw a lot of really interesting problems and decided to branch out on his own with another colleague, Greg's his co-founder, and start VetSnap. So the problem that they're trying to solve is documenting controlled drug inventory is a tedious process. Handwritten logs are time-consuming and difficult. Finding errors is next to impossible, and automating, you know, re-entry or reordering and a bunch of other things all come under that solution. So what they did is they created a solution that's a web-based solution. So it's you log into it on the computer, and in real time you can track, restock, open logs, finish containers. Client and patient information is stored in those logs. They're added directly from the PMS. Highlights potential discrepancies between logbooks and PMS records. It allows you to filter, organize, and search across those logbooks, which is really just kind of fascinating. It's, you know, this paper product, the drug log, has led to a lot of problems. From having him on the podcast, I know that some veterinary practices have been closed by the DEA for ketamine disappearing out the door. So they really looked at that problem and said, how can we solve this with a simple technology solution? And these guys have been growing incredibly quick because of the ease and simplicity of the product that they built. So really, really cool. Never ever thought we would have an episode on the Veterinary Innovation Podcast about controlled substances, but it wasn't controlled substances, it was controlled substance management. So really cool episode, highly recommend it. He recommends The Omnivore's Dilemma, which is a really interesting book, and it really has nothing to do with veterinary medicine at all. But the author, Michael Pollan, is an incredible author, and it just reads so well. Anything that he has written is like a joy to read. He's an incredibly prolific writer. All right, the next one, PetDesk, the liquid biopsy company for pets. It's a molecular diagnostic company dedicated to unleashing the power of genomics to improve pet health. And Melanie is just, or sorry, Lauren is just a sweetheart. I remember meeting her in Kansas City a couple of years ago. She told me her story. She lost her pet. It was really early. She was devastated. And she thought that there must be a better way to treat cancer in dogs. And so she went on the internet, as often we do when we're trying to solve problems for the rest of humanity, and ended up meeting a human medical doctor that lost his wife very, very early to cancer, and chatted with him about some experimental kind of tools that he had found in the journey with his wife, and started a company to be able to detect 30 different types of cancer in dogs with one simple blood draw, so that it can be detected earlier, treated better, and hopefully save animals' lives for these pet parents, which is really, really cool. So her episode and her company is super cool. I definitely recommend it. And her book is also a really great recommendation. The Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World by Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama, and Douglas Abrams. So really interesting person, company, and product. So very, very, very cool. Keep it going. So Med Dimensions, really, really interesting company. Shawn is a really cool guy. Shawn was in vet school. He was, in second year in vet school, and found that there was all kinds of issues with like the way that he was learning to use a scalpel. And at the same time, he fell in love with 3D printing and thought, hey, geez, I bet there might be an opportunity to take some of this passion that I have for 3D printing and maybe mix it into what I'm learning as a veterinary student. And so the problem that they were trying to solve was doctors and students can get a general idea of what to expect in the operating room, but there are always unknowns. There's always variables that occur during routine and uncommon procedures. And so what they built is a 3D printing company that helps educate, prepare, and perform with the education, preparation, and performance of procedures and surgeries. They built all kinds of interesting things, and they're a really fascinating company, and just such a passionate group of like young vet students that are driving this thing, and they're probably just about out of vet school, and I'd love to check in on their company. So the episode was integrating innovative technologies into surgery and education. And the book that he recommends is The Rise, or actually it's not a book, it's The Rise of 3D Printing YouTube channel, which is a really, really interesting channel. At last count, I think 3D printing can do over 100 different materials, including metal, biological materials. It's incredible what they can print nowadays, and it's only going to be getting more complicated and interesting. And everybody, that's it. That's all I got. We're done. We're done a little bit early. I'm absolutely happy to answer questions. If you're interested in innovation, check out the podcast. You can download the presentation by grabbing the QR code there. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. I'm happy to do it.